The first knife missed her ear by no more than an inch. It thudded into the rotted wood behind her with a soft, splintering sound, as if the wall itself winced. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Tight jaws, yellow teeth, shirts soaked with sweat and spilled whiskey. Another coin hit the tin pail beside the man with the knives. $3 gets you 3 throws, boys. You hit her dress, you get your money back. Hit her skin, we double it. The girl didn't flinch. Not even when the next blade sliced a strand of her hair and left it drifting like a feather to the dust. She stood with her arms tied behind her back, pinned against the warped boards of the saloon's rear wall. Her feet were bare. Her dress, once white, was torn down one side and stained with mud, old blood, and whatever filth she'd had to sleep in. There was a ring of soot around her mouth, as though someone had tried to smudge the color out of her face. Her eyes didn't blink. They stared forward, past the line of drunk cowhands, past the knife man, past the sheriff who leaned against a post and pretended not to see. That's when the rancher stepped out of the shadow. He'd been watching for a while, not moving, just leaning against the feed store's porch column, his hat low, arms crossed, watching the blades cut air like birds of prey. He hadn't touched the flask in his coat or the roll of notes in his back pocket. He wasn't interested in the game. He was watching her. She didn't look back. She didn't look at anyone. But when the third knife left the man's hand and struck the wood near her ribs, close enough to draw a sharp intake of breath from the crowd, she blinked once and only once. The rancher stepped down from the porch and walked into the circle. His boots sent up small clouds of dust with each step. The sun was low now, gold pressing hard against the earth, and his shadow stretched long behind him like a black road leading nowhere. He said nothing at first. The knife man looked up. "Show's full, mister. You want in, you gotta wait your—" "I'm not here to throw." The knife man's smirk curled like a wound. "You drunk or just slow?" The rancher reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bill. Then another. Then another. He held them up between 2 fingers like they were nothing more than tobacco leaves. The crowd hushed. Even the sheriff turned his head slightly, the brim of his hat lifting just enough to reveal the glint of his eyes. "I'll give you 30, the rancher said, low and steady. "Not for 3 throws. For her." Laughter came, but it wasn't full. It cracked, confused, uncertain. "She ain't for sale," the knife man spat. The rancher didn't move. "Then you're dumber than you look. Because what you're doing's gonna catch the eye of someone meaner than me. Maybe someone with a badge who ain't half asleep. Or maybe someone with kin like her. She's no kin to no one. Half-breed trash." The man growled. "Picked her up outside the mine after the last raid. You think anyone's coming for her?" The rancher took another step forward. His boots stopped inches from the blade that still quivered in the wood beside the girl's head. He looked at her for the first time. And this time she looked back. Just a glance. Nothing more than a flick of her eyes. But in it was 1,000 unsaid things. Defiance, resignation, hunger, and something else. Something still alive. The rancher knelt. He plucked the knife from the wood and handed it back to the man without breaking her gaze. Then he turned the bills over in his palm and offered them again. 30. You let her go, no trouble. Or you say no. And I stay here all night, sober, watching you until someone less polite arrives. The knife man looked to the sheriff, who hadn't moved, who still didn't move. A long silence dragged like chains in the dust. Then the knife man snatched the money and spat to the side. "Take your charity case, cowboy. She ain't worth the rope she's tied with." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't laugh. They just shuffled, muttered, and started drifting back toward the saloon where music tried to cover what had just happened. The rancher cut her bindings loose. Her hands fell limp at her sides, red and chafed. She didn't stumble, didn't speak, just looked at him like he was a shadow that might vanish any second. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. "Mine's Eli Carter. I got a horse hitched by the trough. You want to run, now's your chance. I won't stop you." Still nothing. Then slowly she stepped forward. 1 step, 2. and followed him into the heat and away from the blood-soaked dust of that alley behind the saloon. She never looked back. Not once. Eli didn't speak on the ride back. Neither did she. She rode behind him on his mare, too thin to sit steady, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist, not for trust but for balance. Her head tilted sideways once, and he felt the faintest weight of her cheek against his back. But when he glanced down, her fingers were still curled, tense, like she expected someone to yank her off the saddle at any moment. The ranch sat 12 miles west of town, tucked into a valley between split-shouldered hills and a creek that ran dry most years by August. No neighbors within sight. No railroad, no telegraph wire. Just sky, wind, and the long sound of cicadas humming from the brush. When they reached the barn, he dismounted, tied the mare, and offered her a hand. She ignored it, slid down on her own, and nearly collapsed. He caught her elbow. Easy. She yanked her arm back. Still no words. Inside the barn was cooler, dark with slats of orange light cutting through the wood. The hay was dry and clean, and a few hens clucked under the rafters. Eli laid a wool blanket on a pile of hay, set down a tin plate and a cold biscuit, and poured water from the pump into a cup. "You can sleep here for now," he said, his voice quiet. "Food's clean. Water too. You don't owe me nothing." She crouched but didn't sit, took the cup with both hands, drank slow, like her throat hurt. He started to turn. That's when she spoke. "Calla." He paused. She looked up from the water. Her voice was dry, fragile. "My name's Calla." Eli gave a single nod. "All right, Calla. You'll be safe here." He didn't ask more. Just let the barn door fall shut behind him, the warm creak of hinges echoing in the emptiness. By morning, word had spread. When he rode into town for feed, the air turned quieter than usual. Men at the livery stopped their work to watch. 2 women stepped off the boardwalk and whispered behind gloved hands. Even the grocer, who'd known Eli since he was knee-high, gave him a look like he'd tracked manure into the church. By the time he stepped into the feed store, he knew what was coming. Franklin Mars was waiting inside. Mayor of the town, though no one called him that out loud. He wore the title like a badge and the money like armor. Vest buttoned too tight, pink face sweating under his bowler hat. "You got a moment, Eli?" Mars asked, lips thin as gristle. Eli kept his eyes on the sack of oats. "Make it quick. You really bring that girl out to your place?" Eli didn't answer. Mars leaned closer. "I heard she's Apache, or Comanche, or worse. No papers, no family, no English, maybe. People re-talkin'. They been talkin' for a while," Eli said. "Don't recall it ever meaning much." "Come now," Mars smiled, not kindly. "We ain't got the army to deal with another mess. You know what happened down at Hollow Rock. You think folks'll stand by if trouble comes over your fence?" Eli took the oats in one hand, hoisted it to his shoulder. "She was tied to a wall and sold like a target. That ain't my idea of trouble. That's my idea of hell. You don't know what she's done. And you don't know what you're talking about," Eli said, turning to the door. Mars called after him. "If something happens out there, we won't come. You're on your own." Eli didn't stop, didn't speak, just walked out into the dust and sun, the weight of what he'd chosen settling deeper across his shoulders than the sack ever could. Back at the ranch, Calla hadn't touched the biscuit, but she'd swept the barn floor and set the bucket upright by the wall. She didn't ask questions, didn't give thanks. But when Eli led her to the house to patch her wrists and find her a cleaner blanket, she followed. Not close, not warm, just willing. They didn't speak much over the next 2 days. Eli repaired fence posts. Calla washed her hair at the pump, tied it back with a string of twine. She still wouldn't eat more than a few bites, still slept with one eye open. But she didn't run. And then came the tracks. Eli saw them before the sun cleared the ridge. 2 horses, maybe 3, riding slow. Not wagon tracks, riders. He crouched by the prints, eyes narrowing. They hadn't come to the house. Not yet. That night, he told Calla. Her face didn't change, but her breathing did. Slower, tighter. "You think they're from town?" she asked. Too clean for town riders, he said. Too far west. Calla stood in the doorway of the barn. The moonlight lit one side of her face, soft and bruised. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. Just watching the dark like it owed her something and never paid. I won't bring war to your land, she said quietly. Eli shook his head. I think the war's already here. The only question is who's fighting for what. Neither of them said more. But the next morning, the sheriff rode out with a white cloth tied to his saddle, and Eli's blood ran cold. The sheriff didn't tie his horse to the hitching post. He didn't dismount either. Just sat in the saddle, hat low, hand resting on the butt of his pistol, watching the ranch house like it might catch fire on its own. Eli stepped out onto the porch slow, his coat unbuttoned but his own iron holstered plainly at his hip. The two men studied each other for a long while. You planning to come in? Eli asked. The sheriff spat into the dirt. Wouldn't be polite. Didn't peg you for polite. I ain't, the sheriff said flatly. But I also ain't interested in spooking whoever's inside that barn. Eli leaned against the post, arms crossed. Then say what you came to say. The sheriff shifted in the saddle, squinting toward the hills behind the ranch. Got riders seen a fire out near Dead Horse Ridge. Signal fire, they said. Could have been anything. But a few hours later, tracks were found heading east. For horses. Heavy. Armed. And they ain't lawmen, and they're not from town. Which means they're either Apache, or men who've done something bad enough they don't want to be seen. Eli's jaw flexed. I need to know who's in your barn, the sheriff said. Not officially. Not on paper. Just between us. Eli didn't speak. He didn't blink either. The sheriff sighed, voice lowering. You think I don't get it? You think I haven't seen what they do to women that look like her when no one's watching? I'm not here to take her away, Carter. I'm here to make sure you know what's coming. Eli finally looked past him, up the ridge where wind blew faint dust off the rock. What's coming? Men who ain't afraid of blood, and who think she belongs to them. A hawk cried overhead, circling wide. The sheriff tipped his hat. I hope you got something loaded in that house besides good intentions. Then he turned and rode out without another word. That night, Eli brought Calla into the house. He said nothing about the tracks, nothing about the riders, but he laid a rifle across the table, set extra firewood by the stove, and locked the doors for the first time in 5 years. Calla noticed. She sat by the hearth, knees pulled to her chest. They're coming. Eli didn't answer. 3 men, she said quietly. Maybe 4. One's name is Halder. The others follow him. They traded sugar and bullets to my people last winter. Said they wanted peace. Said they were friendly. She traced a line across her forearm with one finger. They burned my uncle's camp, took 3 women, left the men hanging from the cottonwoods. Eli's throat felt dry. I ran. Got caught near the riverbank. They meant to sell me down in San Carlos. Then one of them figured out there was money to be made quicker. She looked up at him, eyes dark and still. They'll come for me. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't need to. Eli stood and reached behind the mantel where he kept a second rifle, an old Henry with worn wood and a hair trigger he'd filed smooth himself. He set it gently on the table beside the first. You ever shoot? He asked. Calla nodded once. With my father. When I was small. Eli handed her a cartridge. You're not small anymore. The wind picked up that night, rattling the shutters like hands tapping on the glass. They didn't sleep, just waited. The sun rose slow and orange over the ridge, painting the barn red and the creek gold. For a moment it looked like a good day, but the quiet was too clean, the air too still. And then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Not fast, not galloping, confident. Like men who had no reason to believe they wouldn't be fed, feared, and obeyed. For of them, they came into view like shadows, trailing dust and sun glare, rifles slung easy, hats pulled low. They stopped just beyond the gate, looking at the house like it was prey asleep. One of them called out, Rancher, we're not here to steal cattle. His voice was bright, amused. We just want what belongs to us. Hand her over and we ride out with the sun on our backs and no blood on your porch." Eli stood in the doorway, rifle across his chest. Calla behind him. "You're not riding out with anything but your own bones," Eli said. "And if you take one step closer, I'll start counting." The man laughed. "That girl ain't yours, Carter. And she sure as hell don't want to be." Calla stepped forward then. Not all the way, just enough that the light caught her face. And in Comanche, slow and steady, she said something Eli didn't understand. But the men did. Whatever it was, it made the one in front flinch like he'd been struck. The laughter stopped. The lead rider's face darkened. "You little," but he didn't finish, because that's when the second rifle crackled behind the barn. A warning shot, another man, another voice, from the ridge above. And it wasn't a rancher's voice. It was Comanche. The men froze. Calla stood straighter. "They didn't come for me," she said softly to Eli. "They came because I was seen." She stepped down off the porch. Calm, barefoot. "Let me speak." Eli didn't move, but the four men at the gate, they did. Their hands lowered, just slightly, uncertainty crawling in their faces now that they saw it wasn't just them and a rancher and a girl. The standoff had begun. Not with bullets. Not yet. But with truth. And in the stillness between sun and smoke, something sacred was watching. The wind shifted. A single figure emerged over the crest of the ridge, bare-chested, painted, mounted on a tall bay horse. Behind him, 3 more riders appeared in silence, like they'd been summoned from the stone itself. No war cries, no banners, just presence. The 4 white men by the gate sat frozen in their saddles, sweat beginning to break beneath their collars. Halder, if that was the one in front, tried to speak. "She's a prisoner, that's all. That girl was taken fair after a raid. We paid. She was never yours to take," said the man from the ridge. He spoke English now, clean, quiet, and with the rhythm of someone who'd had to learn each word like a burden. Eli stepped off the porch. Slowly, carefully. "I don't know your name," he said, "but she's under my roof now." The man nodded once. "Then she is your guest, and no man should touch her without offering blood first." Halder's hand moved toward his holster. Calla stepped forward again. She didn't raise her voice, didn't posture. She walked slowly to the space between both parties, the rising sun painting her in gold. Dust swirled around her bare ankles, and the wind lifted her loose hair off her shoulders. "I'm not a symbol," she said. "I'm not a prize. I am not to be passed between men like a mule." Her voice broke slightly, but she kept going. "I came here with no family, no tribe left to defend me, just the will to survive. And this man," she gestured to Eli, "he saw me, not as trade, not as danger, but as a person." She turned to the Comanche riders on the hill. "I have your blood in me, but I've been forgotten by both sides. All I ask now is to live where no one owns me, not in shame, not in chains, just in peace." The man on the ridge dismounted. He walked slowly, no weapon drawn, past the rusted fence post, past the 4 horsemen, until he stood beside her. Calla looked up at him. Something trembled behind her eyes, recognition or memory, passed between them in silence. The man nodded once, then turned to Halder. "You came here thinking you'd claim what was never yours. I see no honor in you. I see no spine." Halder's lip curled. "You think you scare me, half-breed?" The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. One of the Comanche riders from the hill raised a bow, slow, ceremonial, and pointed it toward the sky. A second later, a short arrow thunked into the dirt between Halder's horse and the fence. Not a shot to kill. A mark. A line in the sand. Halder's face turned crimson. He reached for his sidearm, but Eli already had the rifle raised. "Try it," he said, "and I'll put you down before you can clear leather." The 3 men behind Halder shifted in their saddles, unease clear in their posture. One of them glanced toward the hills again. Another spat in the dirt and turned his horse slightly, as if already retreating in spirit. Calla stood unmoving, her face calm. "I'm not yours," she said again, this time to Halder directly. "Not in name, not in blood, not in fear." Halder's nostrils flared. Then, like something in him cracked, he yanked the reins and wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over," he growled over his shoulder. "You'll wish you'd let her go when you had the chance." The other three followed, slower, one by one. They didn't speak. The dust of their hooves drifted in the wind until it disappeared across the lower flats. Calla exhaled softly. The man from the ridge stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You speak with your mother's strength," he said in Comanche. "She would have wept to see you alive." Calla blinked, then swallowed hard. "Do you know her name?" she asked. The man nodded. "Many knew her. She was taken too. But she never bowed." Calla's voice trembled. "They called me half-breed. Said I didn't belong to anyone." The man glanced to the ranch house, then back to her. "You belong to yourself," he said. "That is the hardest thing to protect." They stood a moment longer. Then, like mist, the Comanche riders turned and disappeared over the ridge again. No farewell, no promise, just presence and leaving. Eli lowered his rifle slowly. Calla walked back to the porch. She sat on the steps, barefoot, hands in her lap. Her eyes stared out across the land like she was seeing it for the first time without chains. Eli sat beside her. Not close, just enough to share the quiet. After a long pause, she spoke. "You don't know what it's like to be nothing to everyone." Eli looked toward the hills. "No, but I've known what it's like to lose every name that ever mattered." They didn't talk more that morning, just sat side by side as the light changed over the grass, and the wind carried off the scent of dust and gun oil and something deeper, the echo of a decision that couldn't be undone. Weeks passed. The scars on Calla's wrists faded, but the way she looked over her shoulder before stepping outside didn't. Not at first. Some fears don't dissolve with safety. They just settle deeper, become part of the ribs. Eli never asked where she'd been before the alley wall. He didn't ask about her mother, or the camp, or how long she'd gone without food. He let her speak only when she wanted, and on some days she didn't want to at all. But she stayed. She moved from the barn into the house, quietly at first, sweeping the floors, boiling coffee in the mornings before he rose. She learned the old hound's name, began feeding the chickens, started placing her shoes outside the back door in a neat little line like she was daring herself to root. Eli watched it happen and said nothing, just let the rhythm settle. One morning, she stood at the stove frying cornmeal with the same calm she'd once stood under knives. Her hair was braided back. Her voice, when she finally broke the silence, was soft but steady. "You don't ask me things," she said. Eli, seated at the table cleaning the bridle straps, glanced up. "Don't figure it's mine to ask." "Why not?" He thought for a moment. "Because the truth don't always belong to the one who wants it. Sometimes it stays where it was buried." Calla nodded, then turned the cakes in the skillet. "I remember my mother's hands," she said. "She was taken when I was 5, but I remember how her fingers smelled like cedar and wood smoke. I remember her singing to the horses when no one else was around." She turned. "She would have liked this place." Eli swallowed. "Then I'm glad it found you." Later that afternoon, he rode into town for supplies. The streets were quieter than before, but the stares hadn't disappeared entirely. Some nodded. Some looked away. Mars was gone, packed up and left for Flagstaff 2 weeks back after a letter arrived with a government seal and a warning. No one said what was in it, but folks noticed his absence. The sheriff was still around. Eli passed him on the boardwalk. "She's still with you?" the sheriff asked. Eli nodded. The sheriff nodded too. "Good." That was all. Back at the ranch, a rainstorm gathered low on the horizon. Not a fierce one, just a steady roll of gray clouds and the promise of something soft on dry earth. Calla was in the field with the goats when he returned. Her dress hiked up past her knees, hair wild from the wind. She waved once. That was new. They ate supper by lamplight, the storm tapping gently at the roof, and for once she laughed. Not loud, just a quiet sound, like someone testing whether joy could still fit inside their chest. It did. She asked if he'd teach her to saddle the roan mare herself. He said yes. The next day, she rode out alone across the southern ridge, came back before dusk. No sign of fear in her eyes. The day after, she didn't just come back. She brought wild onions in her dress, a gift. Seasons changed. The wind got colder. They moved the chickens into the shed, dug a pit for smoked meat, hauled up extra firewood. Eli built a second cot in the house, but she never used it. Said the floor by the hearth reminded her of somewhere old, somewhere safe. They didn't call what they had anything, but it was something, and sometimes that's enough. One night, when the stars were sharp and the moon sat heavy over the plains, Calla sat at the porch edge, knees hugged to her chest. Eli stood behind her, arms crossed. "You still thinking about leaving?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, "I think about all the places I've never seen, all the names I haven't earned. But when I picture where I'd go, I keep landing back here." She looked up at him. "You ever feel like you were meant to find something? Not because you deserved it, but because it was the only way both of you could keep breathing?" Eli nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon I do." She smiled, not just with her mouth, but her whole face. It was the kind of smile that didn't need to be returned, just held. They sat like that for a while. No sound but the cicadas, the wind through cottonwoods, and the old, slow hum of two people learning how to live again. And years later, when the land had changed, when trains ran through the valley and old houses sagged with time, folks still told the story about the girl who stood against the wall in silence, and the rancher who paid more than anyone thought she was worth, only to find, in the end, she was worth more than he'd ever thought possible.